While a motive in that assassination of Charlie Kirk remains unclear, there's no denying the disturbing pattern of political violence. Joining us now is Matthew Dalek, a professor at George Washington University Graduate School of Political Management. First, I want to get your reaction to yesterday's deadly shooting.
Well, it's obviously horrific, and it strikes me that there have been a lot of attempts on Nancy Pelosi, Governor Josh Shapiro, Donald Trump twice, but this one, of course, succeeded, and the assassination succeeded, and so it's horrific, and it's but it's not obviously that surprising because we're living in a time where these events sadly are part of a grim routine.
Yeah, sadly, it feels like it's becoming the new norm. Why is politically motivated violence on the rise in the U.S., and how is it shaping who gets involved in our politics?
Mm. Well, I think there are a lot of reasons. I think one of the big ones is that the political rhetoric now is primarily about the other side as the enemy within. So there's dehumanization in a lot of the rhetoric, but there's also a sense that the greatest threat to the United States is the enemy within. We've heard President Trump say that, and to some extent, I think people on the left have also made that argument. And that, I think, makes it easier for individuals who are unwell and have easy access to high-powered weapons to want to take matters into their own hands, to commit, these acts of violence. Social media acts as an accelerant, and a lot of Americans, I think, have lost faith in institutions and leaders and elites, and it makes it harder for those institutions and leaders then to push back on the extremes after these acts. And so what we see is an act occurs, like this horrific killing of Charlie Kirk, and immediately the divisions start to widen. So the country doesn't necessarily come together. People are fighting over who's to blame and calling for war or vengeance. So, there's a lot going on behind it, but I think those are some of the factors fueling this era.
Yeah, you spoke of the enemy within, and I just want to jump ahead. This was actually my next question, but as we reflect on 9/11, I can't help but remember the sense of unity that we felt in the days that followed. And looking at where we are now, there's so much noise, there's so much negativity, and the threat level is so high. This is a critical moment for our nation's leaders. What do you want to see from them?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, on 9/11, today is 9/11. One would think that it would be a day of remembrance and unity. And yet, of course, the primary story, I think, as it should be, was this horrific killing of Charlie Kirk. In terms of what we see, well, I think we don't have to look further than the governor of Utah, Spencer Cox, or the Democratic leading candidate for mayor in New York City. They both gave really terrific comments and statements yesterday, not just condemning the killings, but talking about a common humanity that we need to recapture. I think also Governor Cox in particular recognized that his words were unlikely to resonate against the tsunami of social media noise and the kind of discordant voices of rage and hate. But I think that, those two at least, were models for the kind of leadership that we ought to have. And if more leaders were to do that, it would not be a panacea by any stretch, but it would help at the margins in the way that George W. Bush helped when he said Islam is peace and went to the mosque in Washington 6 days after 9/11, or in the way that Bill Clinton went to Oklahoma City after the horrible bombing of a federal building there and gave a brilliant speech condemning extremism. So there are things that leaders can do, and they can start by using their bully pulpits to send the message that this is totally unacceptable.
And finally, Professor, I know Kirk spoke to young conservatives and his reach on social media. for example, was huge. I'm just wondering, how do you suspect his death will influence the conservative youth movement?
Yeah, it's really hard to know because his death leaves a huge void in a really potent and sprawling movement. I don't think, he was probably the most influential conservative youth leader in the United States, maybe almost akin to a kind of young William F. Buckley in the 1950s and 60s. And so obviously there are many followers and also allies who will step in and kind of pick up the pieces of the movement and I'm sure continue the organization Turning Point USA. But obviously he was a hugely influential voice, and also I fear as well that um, his loss is understandably going to enrage many of his supporters, and um, so it's hard to know. It's pretty dystopian.
Well, we appreciate your perspective. There's so much more to discuss, but we thank you for your time today, Professor Matthew Dallek.
Thanks for having me.